Good morning, Seacrest Village. It is Rabbi Leah here Hi there with Rabbi Leah. I hope you're all well. I hope you had a wonderful weekend, and it's so great to be back with you again today. This coming Wednesday evening at sundown, we will begin the 25-hour fast and observance of Tisha B'Av. This is the month of Av, Tesha, meaning the word 9. And some of you may have grown up calling it Tisha B'Av. I know my mom did because she pronounced a lot of the Hebrew words with a Yiddish inflection. She used to say Oliver Sholem, and I thought she was talking about a man by the name of Oliver Sholem. So anyway, I wanted to talk a little bit about Tisha B'Av and what it's all about, why we observe it. It's not a celebration, it's an observance. And talk about it in a modern context as well. And then we will, on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock, I'll be having a brief service, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. So, as I mentioned, Tisha B'Av falls on the 9th day of the month of Av, which is the month that we're in right now. And it is a fast day in Judaism. Not fast like it goes quickly, but fast in that we fast. And in fact, it is the only other day of the Jewish year that we have a full fast, like on Yom Kippur, from sundown to nightfall. And that's what you don't say sundown to sundown, but we say sundown to nightfall because you actually have to wait until after you see 3 stars in the sky for the day to be over. And that's why it goes for 25 hours. So as I go through some of this, you're going to see some similarities between Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av in terms of the customs, the practices, and so on. So the original disaster, the original event that took place on the 9th of Av was the destruction of Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple was the first temple that was built. It was destroyed by the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And then the second temple was destroyed by the Roman Empire. And both of these occurrences were said to have happened on the 9th of Av. And in actuality, in the case of the second temple, that the burning of the temple by the Romans was just so extreme that it burned for 2 days. So there are some communities in which they observe a second day as well without the fasting rituals. It is regarded as one of the saddest days in the Jewish calendar. In fact, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar. Yom Kippur is serious and full of reflection, but it's not a sad day. In fact, many consider it to be a gift from God that we actually have been given this day on which we can repent and do teshuvah and get ourselves sealed in the book of life for another year. So we need to be serious and reflective on that day, but it isn't necessarily a sad day. Tisha B'Av, however, is a sad day. And it's, as I said, it's believed to be a day which was destined for tragedy. Usually falls in July or August on the Gregorian calendar, and this year, of course, it falls in July, at the very end of July. So the day is observed with 5 different prohibitions, which I'll get to in a minute. The Book of Lamentations is read. The Book of Lamentations is called Echa in the Hebrew, and it talks about the Babylonian exile in poetic form, mourns the destruction of Jerusalem. There are keynotes which are read and spoken, and keynote are dirges and elegies, which are sad poems that lament the loss of the temples in Jerusalem. And the day has also become known as being associated with other major calamities that have befallen the Jewish people. such as the murder of the 10 martyrs, the 10 rabbis, massacres in numerous medieval communities during the Crusades, and the Holocaust. So all of these calamitous events have been linked to Tisha B'Av as a day of great mourning and sadness. So, in the history of this day, there are five calamities, five major calamities that are believed to have happened, which is what we remember on this day. The first is that the 12 spies whom Moses sent out to the land of Israel to check it out came back. And on that day, 10 of those spies, all but Caleb and Joshua, gave a glowing report of the land, but then sent the Israelites into a frenzy because they said that the enemies there were so substantial that the Israelites would all be wiped out if they tried to go into the land. And clearly what they did was they got the entire community of Israel riled up and scared, and so they did not want to go into the land. And so that was seen as a catastrophic day because it was on that day, just 2 years into the Exodus, that the Israelites were told that any of the generation that had come out of Egypt would not be going into the land. Only those who were born since they left Egypt would be permitted to go. So this was seen as a calamitous event. Number two, the first temple that was built by Solomon was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and that was in 587 BCE. So that was the first temple. The population of the kingdom of Judah, which was in the south, there was a kingdom of Israel in the north and Judah in the south, was sent into Babylonian exile. And according to the Bible, the first temple's destruction began on the 7th of Av, but continued all the way until the 10th of Av. So that includes the 9th of Av in there. The third calamitous event was the second temple, built by Ezra and Nehemiah, and it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. Scattered the people of Judea and commenced the Jewish exile from the Holy Land, which existed for 2,000 years. So that was also a significant time of calamity. Then, about 65 years later, in 135 CE, there was a revolt by Bar Kokhba and his armies that destroyed the city of Bahar, and the Romans subsequently crushed that revolt, killed 500,000 Jewish civilians, over 500,000. They think about 580,000, and that was on August 4th of 135 CE, which fell on Tisha B'Av. And then the fifth event was following the Bar Kokhba revolt, that a Roman commander whose name was Turnus Rufus plowed the site that the temple in Jerusalem had been on and all the surrounding area. And that was in the same year as the Bar Kokhba revolt. So these were the five main calamities that occurred, and they are kind of lumped together for the purposes of observing Tisha B'Av. It's become a Jewish day of mourning, not only for these events, but also for later tragedies which have occurred on or around the 9th of Av. For example, the First Crusade, which officially commenced on August 15th of the year 1096, which killed 10,000 Jews and destroyed Jewish communities in France and in the Rhineland. In 1306, on the 10th of Av, Jews were expelled from France. On July 31st, 1492, that's a familiar year, which was the 7th of Av, the Jews were expelled from Spain. And on August 1st and 2nd of 1914, Germany entered World War I, and that was the 9th and 10th of Av. And of course, that war caused major upheaval in European Jewry, and the aftermath of World War I was seen as leading to the Holocaust. On August 2nd, 1941, Commander Heinrich Himmler received the final permission for the final solution from the Nazi Party. And so the Holocaust began in earnest at that point, with almost 1/3 of the world's Jewish population dying. On July 23rd, 1942, which was the 9th of Av, they began the mass deportation of Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka. And then on the 10th of Av in 1994, the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires was bombed, killing 85 people and injuring another 300. And so, is this coincidental? Do these things happen because those who are perpetrating these catastrophes have any idea that it's the 9th of Av? Probably not. But we do know, for example, that even in this country, we have seen acts of terrorism against Jews take place sadly, on Hitler's birthday by groups who are neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and still, observing that day as a day of celebration. And they do that by killing Jews. So the Holocaust spanned, of course, a number of years, but most religious communities used Tisha B'Av to mourn the 6 million Jewish victims. And there was once, when Menachem Begin was Prime Minister of Israel, there was an attempt to make Holocaust Memorial Day, Yom HaShoah, or Yom HaShoah, Tisha B'Av, and Memorial Day for the soldiers, Yom HaZikaron, all one day of celebration, but it wasn't passed by the Knesset, so they still remain as 3 separate days. There are some other related observances. The 17th of Tammuz, which is the month that we just finished, there was a siege of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, and that was on the 10th of Tevet. And then on the 17th of Tammuz, the breach was made in the wall by the Romans. So we have different half-fast days that are associated with these major events. Some would also say that the shattering of the 10 Commandments, which happened on Yom Kippur, is akin to the shattering of the temples in Jerusalem. There's all sorts of metaphors that are used for this day. Some say that the breaking of the glass at a Jewish wedding ceremony. There are different origins to that, but some say that it also represents the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And that even in the most joyous of times, we're also supposed to remember the catastrophic events that have been, that Jews have been victims of for 5,700 and almost 81 years. Okay. The 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, so if you count from this coming Thursday back 3 weeks, are known as the 3 weeks. And they lead up to Tisha B'Av, which is known as the 9 days. So there is a period of time during these 9 days and so on, or these 3 weeks, when certain things are not permitted to happen. And I'll get into that in just a minute. When Tisha B'Av falls on Shabbat, on a Shabbos, it is delayed, and the Hebrew word for that is nidche. So you clearly are not. Nothing is supposed to happen on Shabbat that is in any way um, uh, sad in nature, and Shabbat is only to be celebrated and enjoyed. And so the observance will take place the next day on the Sunday, which is the 10th of Av. That happened last year in 2019, and I think it's going to happen again in a couple of years, 2022. So, no outward signs of mourning are ever supposed to intrude upon a normal Shabbat, although if Tisha B'Av it does fall on Shabbat, um, eating and drinking end at sunset that day, rather than at nightfall, which would be Havdalah. So Shabbat is a little bit amended just until um, sunset, not nightfall, which comes about 90 minutes after sunset. Does that make sense? Actually, this is why we do Havdalah not at sunset, but any time between 75 minutes and 90 minutes after sunset, because it has to happen at nightfall. When the sun is setting, it takes a while for the sun to get set. So some communities say 75 minutes, some say 90 minutes. Depends on where you're from. So here are the main prohibitions, and many of them are very similar to what we see on Yom Kippur. No eating or drinking for 25 hours. No washing or bathing. No application of creams or oils. So that would include makeup, because much makeup is oil-based or cream-based. No wearing of leather shoes, and no marital relations. So those 5 prohibitions, which are evident on Yom Kippur, also take place on Tisha B'Av. And of course, if somebody has health issues, in a case of health issues, those restrictions and prohibitions are waived, because nothing is more important than pikuach nefesh, the saving of a life. It's also forbidden to participate in any enjoyable activity. So Torah is not read because that's seen as a joyful activity, but there are other texts that are read. For example, the Book of Lamentations, as I mentioned, is the traditional scroll that is read on that day. Megillat Echa, and I'll be reading some portions of that on Thursday for part of our commemoration. Parts of the book of Job, parts of Jeremiah. You know, Jeremiah was the prophet of gloom and doom, who very negative, and was, did not live a very pleasant life, because people didn't want to hear the truth. Chapters of the Talmud are also read that discuss laws of mourning and so on and so forth. The parochet, which is, if you know, the doors of the ark are closed, and when they're open, sometimes there is a curtain that is hung over in front of the Torah scrolls, in addition to having the doors, and that parochet, that curtain is known as a parochet. And in some communities, that is removed or drawn aside until the afternoon service on the day of Tisha B'Av. People sit on low stools, very much like sitting Shiva, or on the floor. And the meal immediately after the fast has a special name. It's Suda Hamafseket. Customarily, now this is a little bizarre, people are supposed to eat a hard-boiled egg dipped in ashes and a piece of bread dipped in ashes. Now, it doesn't say covered with ashes, it says dipped. So I don't know what the ashes are from. I don't think they're from an animal. And I didn't want to do research into that because I found it a little bit a little bit, I don't know, it was hard to digest, let's put it that way. But it's a metaphor. It is the combining of an egg, which is new life, and ashes, which is death. And so showing that out of ashes comes life. And this is how we feel on Yom Kippur, as if, we are dying that day and being reborn to new life through our act of teshuvah, through our act of repentance. Um, so there are a variety of these customs which are observed. If possible, work is avoided during this period. Electric lighting should be turned off or dimmed. It's not 100% like Shabbat in that no work can be done, but one is really not supposed to, engage in the more profane activities, the more day-to-day activities that we usually do. Keynote, which are these dirges and elegies, sad poems, and so on, are recited by candlelight. Some people modify the way they would normally sleep. So, for example, they'll sleep without a pillow, and people will refrain from greeting each other on that day or giving gifts. And interestingly enough, old prayer books and Torah scrolls are often buried on that day. So in a Jewish cemetery, there's a separate area, a separate grave, called a geniza, in which Jewish scrolls and Jewish Torahs and books, anything that has the word Yud He Vav He, Adonai, in it, is buried. And that is a traditional day to bury that. As I mentioned, when Tisha B'Av falls on a Saturday, it's observed on Sunday, but it's not necessary to wait until Monday at nightfall for all the restrictions to end. That activity ends at sunset, so a little bit earlier. And, what are joyous activities? Eating meat, drinking wine, listening to music, saying the Shehechianu. These are the kinds of things that are not said on Tisha B'Av. So you don't wish somebody a happy Tisha B'Av. That is any more than you wish somebody a good Yom Kippur. You might wish someone a good fast or something of that nature. The scroll of Echa, which is the Megillat Echa, I've mentioned to you before, there are 5 scrolls, is read in the evening before. So we would normally be reading that on Wednesday evening. I'm going to be reading parts of it to you on Thursday morning. In Sephardic congregations, many Sephardic congregations also read the book of Job on the morning of Tisha B'Av. And those who are called to read the Torah aren't given the usual congratulations. Normally when somebody reads the Torah, you say Yashar Koach, Yishar Kochachem, whatever it might be. And there's also a tradition that if somebody is called to read the Torah or the Haftarah in the morning of Tisha B'Av, they're also called to read it in the afternoon. I don't know why that might be, but evidently that is traditional. And one reason may be that the morning readings are really filled with this notion of calamity and sadness. The afternoon readings are words of consolation. So whoever reads in the morning and reads these very down, sad, depressing words is able to read something more uplifting in the afternoon. Most of the morning is spent chanting these dirges and these somber, soulful poems. And starting after Tisha B'Av, on every Shabbat, for 7 Shabbatot, this is called the period of consolation. And there are 7 Shabbats of consolation, wherein we read specific haftarot from the book of Isaiah that are providing comfort to the people, because after all, this day not only represents the destruction of the temple, but also the exile of the people from Israel. So not only were things destroyed, but then they were taken as prisoners out of the land. So, so after this intense period of um, of mourning and somber attitude, we need some consolation, and we get that consolation through reading predominantly Haftarot from the book of Isaiah. So, throughout history, there have been those who wanted to abolish the day because, by the third century, by the 15th century, by the 18th century, it had lost a lot of its meaning because the Jews were so far removed from the temple in Jerusalem. But in Israel, even today, a poll revealed that 22% of Israeli Jews will fast on Tisha B'Av, and 52% say that they will forego recreational activities, even if they don't fast. So it is seen kind of as a day of mourning, and it has its roots in more ancient Jewish history, not in biblical history, but in ancient Jewish history, post-biblical. So it's still regarded, even by some modern Israeli Jews, as a fast day. Recreational sports aren't permitted. Um, uh, there were used to be fines if a business was open, and so on. Combat soldiers are absolved from fasting on Tisha B'Av on the basis that it can engender their lives. An army goes into battle on a full stomach, right? So combat soldiers are not obligated to fast. And the whole notion of the Messiah coming is based also on Tisha B'Av, because religious Jews will believe that Tisha B'Av is the date on which the Messiah will come. So it has almost these messianic overtones, and it's religiously significant in that way. But modern, more progressive Jews don't necessarily believe in a Messiah individual coming, as opposed to a messianic age in which there will be no war, no plague, no hunger, no droughts, no calamities. So classical Jewish sources, as I mentioned, do say that the Jewish Messiah is going to be born on Tisha B'Av. But some parts of Judaism look at that more metaphorically than they do literally. Okay, so why in the year 2020 should we observe Tisha B'Av? That is a very good question. After all, we are almost 2,000 years removed from the destruction of one temple in Jerusalem, the destruction in 70 CE. We are 2,600 years removed from the destruction of the first temple. Many of these other calamities, like the Bar Kokhba revolt and the spies coming back with a bad report about the land in Israel, and the Israelites being told that they can't go into the land for another 38 years, and so on and so forth. These are very ancient occurrences. So what is the relevance today? And that is the challenge that we have as more progressive Jews living in the 21st century, is to find that resonance and meaning in our own day. Because, we find that if we only look at these ancient events, we may find them anachronistic and something that is not something with which we can relate. However, there are plenty of other things that we can look at. I don't want to be too specific now, because we'll talk more about that on Thursday during the commemoration. but we can certainly look at the ills in today's society as calamitous events and make sure that we observe those in a somber and mournful way. So there will be no Chai there with Rabbi Leah on Thursday morning, but there will be a Tisha B'Av service and commemoration. You don't need a book for it. It'll start at 10 o'clock, probably go for a half hour, 45 minutes, and I will see you then. For now, thank you for joining me for Chai there with Rabbi Leah, and I'll see you on Thursday. Lehitraot. Bye-bye.